What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Stereotherapy. I'm your host, Lisa, and this is the show that showcases the importance of music and mental health. Today in the show, I was joined by Daniel Rinaldi. If you're unfamiliar with him, maybe you're familiar with Bedlight for Blue Eyes. You know, that was a band I think a lot of us grew up on, but I think a lot of us maybe slept on as well. So if you're unfamiliar, all links below for that. But Daniel was the vocalist between 2006, 2009. So if you were in that era and a fan of Bedlight for Blue Eyes, you definitely heard his voice. This was such a treat for me to sit down with him because I saw him play with the likes of New Found Glory and Senses Fail. And then now, all these years later, to get to sit down with him and talk music and mental health, it was just such a privilege. And I'm so thankful that he took the time and came on our show to talk about it. I also want to shout out Anthony of Noise Protocol. He is the reason this came to be. He set this up and he connected Daniel and I, and I'm so glad we could all make this happen. Daniel and I really dive into the whole touring aspect and what bands and what musicians face on tour. As you know, touring is right now in this industry, it is how these artists make the most of their money. But at the same time, to think about how taxing it is and how mentally and how that can really impact an artist. So I love that we kind of got on the topic of that, of past and present, and what we think the industry should do. And then we also dove in because obviously Daniel not being in Bedlight for Blue Eyes anymore, he's now connecting with people in a different way because he is now a licensed therapist and working in the mental health field. So I think it's one of those things that it's really interesting to hear his take back then when he was in a band and now as a therapist and what we can do to help people in the mental health field. So there's so many takeaways in this, and I really appreciate Daniel for taking the time again to come on our show. I'll have all the links below to go check out Daniel and go give him a follow and support him. And yeah, I can't wait to share this conversation. So let's just get into it. Here's my conversation with Daniel Rinaldi. But thank you again for wanting to come on and do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a really cool opportunity to have a musician on, and then someone who's now not only a musician, and we talk to musicians, but now a therapist in the mental health field too.
Yep.
So you've got that where we haven't really had that. The closest, they're not in the mental health field, but we had Anthony Green on.
Okay, yeah.
And he, although he's not in the field, I mean, he's so open about,
Yeah.
bipolar and addiction and things of that nature. So this was really cool. So I appreciate you taking time and wanting to come on and making time for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is and again, like for me, when Anthony of Noise Protocol like set this up, I was like, Bedlight for Blue Eyes. I'm like, I've listened to this band and I've seen this band with New Found Glory. Like, this is such a treat for me as
Yeah.
well. So it's like, that's so cool. And, just gonna give you all the compliments. Your voice is amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So it's like one of those things, even going back and listening, I was like, oh, yeah, that's just one of those voices that I just think that there were other people I posted in my story, like my personal. I'm like, guess who I get to talk to today before I put it out there? And there were a couple people that were like, such an underrated band. They're so underrated. And
Yeah.
I said, that is like, yes. So this is so, again, like, this is such a cool, almost full circle thing as well for me
Awesome.
as well. So the first question everybody gets is, I want to always bring it back to, because we're music and mental health and that intersection. What are those first memories of you of falling in love with music and realizing music was bigger than, hey, I just like this song. Like there was something deeper connection.
Yeah, I think like when I think back to like the first time like music really kind of like affected me was kind of going to my first concerts like with my dad. So like the first concerts I ever went to were Steely Dan and like Hall and Oates. So like
Hmm.
throwback anyone if anyone's listening and they're in their like 60s nearing
Yeah.
70, you've definitely heard a song or two. But I think like those were kind of like the first times where like I started to like be like, huh, there's something like a little bit different here than just kind of like listening to a song and putting it down and then like walking away from it, to where music always kind of found its way into my life. And I think for a lot of people that happens as well, where it's like kind of sticks with you more than just like you turn off the radio and you go about your day, to where like you're humming it for the rest of the day and you find yourself singing out of nowhere. And so that was kind of like the first times that that really happened. And then like fast forward maybe like eighth grade, I started to realize that I wasn't like the typical sports kid and didn't want to kind of like do the whole all boys play baseball, basketball, whatever it might have been my whole high school career. So I ended up going to a performing arts high school in New York City. And that was kind of like really what kind of changed everything for me, where I was singing every day, performing every day. So it was like that was where it really hit me, was kind of that high school age.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of us too. Like I know for me, as much as I was younger, I'm in the car with my mom, and of course it was she was like, oh gosh, John Mellencamp,
Mm,
any of those, like
yeah.
even Hall and Oates, all of those, and then Meatloaf, I know was a big one too for
Yeah,
her. So like
absolutely.
that, and then her gravitating towards the '90s, so that's where I got pulled. But it was like in the high school of that era of, I know everyone just calls it elder emo and pop punk
Yeah.
era, but that was huge for me, like being, in high school and then like, wow, you see a band like Thursday or
Yeah.
all these bands, Newfound Glory. I mean, huge. And then that changing. So I can only imagine, yeah, performing arts and getting to do that because obviously I went to as public of a school as you can. I mean, we did have things like chorus and band, but it definitely wasn't revolving around that. So I'm sure like just hearing that, how much that shaped you. And I can only imagine like then you fall in love with music, then you do that, and then comes, probably a while later, Bedlight for Blue Eyes. So it's like it's wild. Like where did that journey start for Bedlight for Blue Eyes from like being in high school? Because I know you were fairly young when you started touring.
Yeah. So I was only 18 when I joined the band. I had finished high school and kind of like started my freshman year of college and was kind of like didn't really care. Like
Hmm.
kind of was like
Hmm.
is what it is. I was going to concerts with my good friend Mark, who was well into the emo punk stage of his life. And he had actually brought me to a couple of Bedlight shows before I had joined the band. And I fell in love with the band and was
Hmm.
like, wow, this like sounds, I saw myself up there, is basically what it was. Like, I was like, this guy sounds like me. It was different. And then as soon as I started to love them, they lost their lead singer, and I was like, "Oh,
Hmm.
great!" And this was the time of MySpace, so like I remember
Hmm.
seeing a MySpace bulletin that was like, "We lost our singer, but we're gonna hold audition." And I'd never done anything like that before. I wasn't a band guy. I wasn't in bands when I was younger. Um, and I took a chance, wrote them like a MySpace message that was like, "Hey, I'd like to come out." And lo and behold, like I went out, auditioned, and the rest was history. Like, I think like a few months after that, that was probably like May of who knows what year, but
Hmm.
2006. So 2006, like so like May of 2006, I think by like July, like late July, early August, we were on tour. Um,
Wow.
so it happened very quickly, and like that was like pretty insane for an 18-year-old kid who's like never really went anywhere in the country to then getting in a van with a bunch of strangers and kind of doing your thing.
Yeah, I can only imagine because I obviously wasn't in a band, but I would travel to go to the shows. I mean, I grew up 30 minutes from Chicago, and
Okay.
now I'm in Central Jersey. So I moved. But at the time, being in Chicago, you could go to like Wisconsin, you can go to
Yeah.
Michigan, you can go to Ohio, even. Even in Indiana when bands would come through. And I know it would always like depend on their routing and everything, but I would just travel for maybe 3 days at a time, like whether it was Warped Tour, and I can only imagine like being like again I was like 18, 19 when I would do that. I can only imagine then being in a touring band. I couldn't even imagine that because 3 days I was like, all right, let's just go home. I want to go home. I want to shower. I want to go back to real life and do that. So yeah, I can't imagine being that young and then doing everything with touring, right? Because I think a lot of us forget when we go see our favorite band, whether it's that night or maybe you go to two shows, you're seeing them at maybe 6 p.m., 7 p.m., that ticket you have. But so much has happened in those drives to get there. How did that sort of touring then kind of affect your mental health? I would assume it would, especially being young and those experiences.
I think one of the biggest thing that stands out to me is that we at that time in music, we weren't really talking about mental health.
Hmm.
So that was a big thing, right? Like there were no outlets. Like maybe there were some of like the early rumblings of like some of the, To Write Love in Our Arms was coming about and like
Hmm.
all of these other companies, but it was hard. Like I remember there were plenty of nights where like I was like put my blanket over my head and just like kind of like cried because it was hard. Like, like like you said, like you don't realize how much goes into it before you show up to a show. Like there's breakups, makeups, there's your van breaks down, you run out of money. Not every band at that time was getting tour support from labels, right? So like there was times where you're swiping your own credit card to put gas in the van to get to the next show. So there's a lot that goes into it, and I think, you know, we all kind of just dealt the best we could and kind of held it in until we got to the next show. It wasn't towards the end that we started, I think, talking about mental health and taking care of it a little bit more. I know for me, like I just kind of like held it in and went to the next city, held it in and went to the next city. It was hard to be 18 and the first time you're missing somebody's birthday or the first time you're missing a holiday because you're on tour, and you just try and make the best of it. And I think that probably still rings true for a lot of, bands that are still out there doing it, where it's just like you put your head down and you go to the next city and you don't really talk about it until you need to.
Yeah, I remember growing up too with To Write Love in Our Arms. That was the first time, oh, like what is this? Let me, dive in because I remember that time, like even I mean, we talk about mental health now, but even then there's still a lot of people that I feel like we still have a long way to go, just from me experiencing and even having people around me that I know are going through things, but maybe they're not ready to talk about it
Hmm.
or they feel like they can't, which I think is a thing too. I think a lot of us, even with my podcast, it's the intersection like of music and mental health, but I never push it, right? Like I always tell people like we're not just a mental health podcast because I find that people use music to help them cope through
Hmm.
their mental health. But at the same time, I'm never like, whenever I'll talk to someone, hey, would you like to come on? It's like, listen, I don't need to know your life story. If you would like to talk about mental health, whatever you're comfortable with, because I it's think as long as we make mental health, I think, comfortable to talk about, I think that has helped. There's been so many people I've had on that maybe they weren't sure how our conversation was going to go, but towards the end, they're like, I needed this. Like, I needed to talk
Yeah.
about my mental health and what I'm going through. And everybody's unique in what they share. And I think I had a guest on Chris Russ recently, and he talked about how actually music has been, where we talk about music being an aid to our mental health, music really affected his mental health in a negative way. And I think a lot of us maybe don't think about that, like musicians, and whether it's your plays, your album numbers, touring,
Hmm.
how I know you were just saying too, sometimes you put a blanket over your head and cry or just get through it. How did you kind of sort of, I mean, you've touched on it, but how, looking back, how did you get through all that?
I think there's a lot of like detachment that happens. I think you detach yourself from a lot of it and you just find the things. I know for me, for myself, it was getting to a town and exploring.
Hmm.
So getting to a town and exploring what the town had to offer, this what the, obviously like when you think about Chicago, right? Like my first thing would be like, where am I going to eat as soon as I
Yeah.
get there, right? Like, or, you get to California and you're like, I'm going to explore, this part of it. I'm going to go to this thrift store. So you find like little pockets that help yourself. I know a lot of people, they play video games or
Hmm.
they do things, you know, so those were really the things for me that were helpful, were finding like finding connection in places, whether that be with the actual place or connecting with people, right? Like getting into a town and you happen to be at the pizza place and you see a fan and you talk to them for a bit, right? Like it helps bring like a normalcy to your life where you're this like traveling circus and you get to town and you finally feel a little bit of normalcy. So I think like in those moments for me, it was finding things that made me feel comfortable, um, in that time. And I'm if I was touring today, I think it would be the same thing. It would be finding those spaces to where like I could go to like the local restaurant or the store and just kind of connect with what's around me.
I think that would be something, and anyone listening that is touring, whether small scale, I mean, it's all touring, right? You're still doing that. I think that's such an important thing. And I think some of the bands I've had on, I don't know if they've touched on that, or maybe they just didn't share that. Because I think, yeah, that would really help it. And I know we see people like Chapel Roan at the Grammys talking about insurance and labels. What do you wish now that people are a little more open talking about mental health? What do you wish the industry, I guess, and then what you witnessed, and then maybe where it's at today? What do you wish they focused on with artists? Because yeah, like you were touring at a time, like you said, like mental health really wasn't like you didn't talk
Yeah.
about it at all.
I mean, and I still think there's a lack of talking about it, right? I still think
Hmm.
there's room for mental health and the mental wellness of the people you're putting out on the road. There's room for that to be just as important as album sales, because if you're, from an industry perspective, if your band can't tour or there's something going on. I know recently, I think it was like, what was it, Icy Stars had to cancel a bunch of stuff because and they
Yeah.
cited mental health, right?
Hmm.
Everyone loses money, everyone loses things, right? So why aren't we taking the time to make sure that these people, these young adults that are going out on tour aren't are taken care of mentally, taken care of health wise, to where, I've talked to plenty of people that are still actively in the scene, to where it's like, what's mental health like, and they're like, it doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of that comes from stigma and what the scene was always about. There's this kind of like big, you know, kind of like this big machismo sort of vibe, where it's like, you know, punk and emo was always rooted in that like tough guy sort of thing. And I don't think it needs to be that anymore. Certainly, like I said, back in the day, like it didn't exist. And what I
Hmm.
hope, eventually happens is that, bands feel comfortable enough to reach out and to do those things, because I think there's companies out there that are trying to do the work, but the problem that exists is that they're hoping that band members come to them as opposed to them going to the band members.
Hmm.
So like if you're expecting a person who's already skeptical about their mental health and therapy, they're not necessarily going to reach out to someone like me and say, hey, I need help, or hey, so and so gave me your name. Whereas, it'd be great if there was a company or something that would say, hey, this label, we want to offer you this. Let's work together and have it be, just as much a part of it as a manager or a booking agent or a label A&R, to where your band feels comfortable going to this person or hitting this person up and saying, hey, I'm not doing so well. What are some things I can do?
Yeah, because I think that's even me and my own mental health journey, and that is I was not someone to always just go to somebody. I was an
Right.
isolator. I still find myself at times where I have to like get myself out of that, and sometimes it is hard to go to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm struggling," or "I need help,"
Right.
or especially if you go to somebody, right, and they don't meet you with maybe a response you like. That's been my thing where maybe I'll say, "Hey, I'm really struggling right now. I'm going through this." And maybe they're just like, oh, hang in there, or the generic responses, which
Hmm.
it's okay. Everybody's their own and how they handle that. But someone struggling is just like, oh, okay, well maybe all right, I'm just gonna keep it to myself. And at least in my experience, that's what I've done. And kind of unlearning that was a lot for me to unpack. And I know other guests I've had on this have said the same thing. They're not ones to go. And I guess someone, especially having you here in your profession, if there is somebody that is on the fence and they're, because like even going to therapy, right? It's a lot to unpack,
Hmm.
and knowing that you may have to unpack things. If somebody is on the fence, they want to start their mental health journey. They're realizing some things. I don't know if it's advice is the right word, but what do you sort of say to that person that maybe wants to get started, but they're afraid to like unpack
Yeah.
everything?
I think there's a lot of that, right? And I
Hmm.
think it's breaking it down to its simplest form. It's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's not, granted, there's a lot of different flavors of therapy, and you're not always going to find the right person for you, right? Therapy is a journey. It's something where when you find the right person, it clicks. And the right person is not going to pick and pick and pick at you and try and expose the wound for their benefit, right? I
Mhm.
think that's what happens a lot where you're worried that, oh, I don't want to go in there and talk about my dad again. I don't want to
Yeah.
go in there and talk about this childhood trauma again. Then don't, right? You have the power. The therapy session is yours and yours alone, right? Like just just like any other appointment that you might have. Therapy sometimes gets put on this like giant pedestal that therapists are like magicians and these people that are all knowing. I always put it says it in most of my, bios for as a therapist, I'm human first, therapist second, right?
Mhm.
When you walk into the room, it's a conversation. And if you treat it like that and you look for and you find that person, then you know that each session is just going to be about you and whatever you bring in. Sure, we might get to something in your past, but it's not the first thing that I'm not asking when you come in. Hey, how was your day? Okay, let's get to this.
Mhm.
Where it's like, no, what are we here for today? Why are we here? So I think, if you're feeling scared of therapy or you're unsure about therapy, is it's just a conversation and shop, right? Like just like you shop quotes for you're renovating your bathroom or doing anything else, if it doesn't feel right, it won't be, right? So don't waste your time trying to figure it out because you're just going to build upon that fear and that and increase that fear of therapy. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Find the next person who's going to help you.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have said too. And in those that have shared that, because we'll ask people, what tools do you use for your own mental health to kind of help people that maybe think they've tried things, but maybe then hearing, hey, someone tries journaling or somebody,
Hmm.
um, you know, for a lot of people, it's exercising, going outside. And I think that's the thing too, is to understand that, like, at least for me and what I've seen for everybody is that there's not one size fits all. And I
No.
think sometimes in mental health, even like friends I talk to, that they'll be like, "Well, I don't have any, anxieties or this and that." And I say that's great, but a lot of us do. And I think that maybe what works for them and what they feel maybe anxiety for them is not the other. Like me in my journey, I'm on the journey right now of possibly in doing this podcast and just social media, hey, you know what? I think I'm showing traits of like ADHD and those things. And now taking that of everyone I talk to that also may do and always letting people know, hey, I'm on that journey too. Like I am just because I have
Yeah.
this podcast does not mean I'm exempt from that. I have my days. And I think it's always, scared, like even me and telling people like, hey, I'm in this process of I'm looking into my insurance. Who can I go to maybe get diagnosed in this? I think I have this. Of course, I want a proper diagnosis, but I think it's okay to be almost afraid of that. But I think what you just said there, we're like, we're in control of that. I'm not going to go
Yeah.
into this office and have to say my whole life story of this and that and I think it's okay to almost be afraid of that. But also for me, it's like, hey, you know what? It's time. I just turned 39. Like for me, it's time to like figure this out. Like something's not right there. And I think if more people maybe voice that if they feel comfortable, it helps people feel less alone. And I think one thing I saw that you did, you had Mental Town with the puppets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, seeing that, I think about like my younger self. If they're, even me going through my parents' divorce, it was one thing where my mom had asked us, "Hey, do you think therapy?" Of course, as a young kid, no, I don't need to go to that. I don't need to do that. And I keep thinking of my younger self when I was going through some of the puppets and thinking, wow, like if I would have had something like this or known this was here, maybe I would have gone.
Right.
What was sort of your inspiration with Mental Town? And do you think that these puppets have helped people, especially I think adults, right? I bet a lot of adults can also see just help and just feel comfort with the puppets.
Yeah, I think it helps where again, it's very hard to sit across from somebody and have a conversation, right? If we
Yeah.
use divorce, right? Like divorce is a very heavy thing. It's confusing
Hmm.
for a child, right? And you don't want to the last people you want to talk to are the people that are giving you these feelings, right? Your
Hmm.
mom and your dad are don't feel as safe as they may have before this turmoil was going on. So when you give something else or put something else in the room for someone to, talk to, project on, utilize, touch, feel, not only puppets, but, sand trays,
Hmm.
I know a person who uses just like they have a great figure collection and
Hmm.
they use all these figures and you're able to like put put words to feelings and put, images to feelings that help make sense, right? Like I feel sad, but I don't know how to convey that, but I know how this can convey that. So I think it kind of gives a voice to the voiceless a bit. And it gives someone a place to go when they don't feel like they can go to like the mom or the dad or the brother or sister, whatever it might be, to where they can yell at this thing. They're not necessarily yelling at their mom, but they're identifying that emotion and really, beginning to figure out what they need.
Hmm. Yeah. Like just looking through them all, I was like, this is like there's an inner child, there's
Yeah,
hygiene, there was just so many things where again, I'm like, wow. Like I wish, again, maybe it did at my age and I just didn't think about it. And even being older, like now I know now if I want that comfort in my own mental health, if I'm having a day, I grab one of my teddy bears sometimes. Like
right,
it's one of those things you have that comfort. And I think a lot of people on our show will talk about obviously like affordability for therapy and things like that. And I guess if someone is struggling in their mental health and they can't afford it, or for maybe they're dropped from their insurance. I've had people on there saying that it's attached to their work. They lose their job, then they can't go to therapy. What do you suggest someone do if they feel like they benefited from something like therapy or something in their mental health, but they just right now they can't afford it? Are there any other tools or anything you would think maybe someone can look to kind of bring them that peace while they're in their mental health journey?
right. So I think, obviously there's a lot of like reputable places
Yeah.
to Google and find, that put up articles and put up all sorts of tools and things. I always say be careful looking on Instagram and TikTok and all that stuff because anyone can put anything up and sometimes the
Mm-hmm.
information is wrong or it's misguided or they're trying to make you buy into something.
Mm-hmm.
So like in certain cases Google's your friend to where there's plenty of there's plenty of counseling practices, schools that put up all sorts of free resources, but also too, there's plenty of ways to go online and find low cost, extremely low cost therapy, right? There's sliding scale where therapists, have like a minimum that they're willing to go for therapy. And sometimes that could be, $60 a session, $50 a
Mm-hmm.
session. There are people that make space for pro bono clients where, the client is paying nothing. So I would urge people to look that up as well, right? Like sliding scale therapists or low cost therapists. Sometimes you might get a pre-licensed counselor who's I view pre-licensed counselors just as good as any other counselor
Mm-hmm.
because I was there once, but also too, you're in it. You're right out of school, you're doing it, and a lot of times that's low cost as well. So always look to that. Look for groups in your area. A lot of places do free groups. It's out there. It's definitely out there. But I would suggest, doing that or reaching out to somebody, in the area. Hey, I noticed your fee is this. I can't afford that. Do you know any other places that I can go to? And most of the time, you're gonna get someone who's gonna have the resources to give you.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. For me, I always thought, okay, this is where I have to go. These are the practices by me. This is my insurance, but not really kind of doing that digging to see there are options, even if you are dropped. Or I know my fiance, he had a therapist and it just wasn't the right fit for him. Nothing against the therapist, but it was just like, oh, it's not really the right fit. But then going through and then his insurance, that was a battle and going through that. And now he found a great one and they work with each other. Like definitely we're okay, this was the right fit.
Hmm.
And I think it can be so defeating for people when they want to go like, okay, I want to go try this. I want to go do this, but now I have to jump through all these hoops. Then maybe if you just do a little extra digging or have someone help you, even if you think you can't do that extra digging at that point, that it's there. I never even thought like some like whether it's pro bono or things like that could exist. And I think that would have helped me years ago because that was my biggest thing. Like years ago, I was like, I would love to get into therapy and tackle these things, but I can't afford like a, $200 session. And I understand
Right.
why they are priced that way. I mean, everybody should be paid their value, but it was like, well, what do I do? And my insurance kind of stinks because I'm young and in my 20s. What do I do? So I love to hear that there are options for people because, even just the male mental health, I get a lot of guests on here that are male, and I'm always like, yes, there is that stigma in itself. What do you think we can do, whether as partners, help men's mental health? Because I know that there's not a one size fits all, but a lot of men, even my closest friends, um, they just don't want to open up, and you can tell they're going through things. What do you think we can do to help men's mental health? Is there anything we can really do?
I think for me, it comes down to visibility and communication. And
Yeah.
it comes down to talking about, talking more about mental health,
Hmm.
talking more about like what's going on in their lives, like, hey, I noticed you're feeling this or you're looking like this, like what can I help you with, is something going on, right? Because oftentimes again, like we just kind of like swallow it up
Hmm.
and bottle it until it kind of explodes, and we're like, oh man, I can't believe so and so, this happened, because we didn't even know, right? So I think like, you know talking about the hard stuff is important. Like it'd be great to have more advocates that feel safe and feel great, right? Because like having some superstar talk about mental health is awesome,
Hmm.
right? But like I don't think that that's necessarily like accessible, right? And
Yeah.
we have to like decrease the thought of like, well, I'm a man and I'm supposed to be tough, and I'm a man and I'm not supposed to feel these things, where it's like, no, 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 feel these things, because that's where we find ourselves getting into this trouble, right? Like, or we find ourselves, if we kind of like swing it back to some of the band guys, right? Like this is where we find where we're canceling tours, or we're quitting our band, or we're developing, substance issues or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
to where it's like no one's talking about it. There's too many hoops, there's too many steps to get there. And I think if we make it easier to access mental health resources, therapists, and other providers, I think that's where we start to see people like open up more. Like you said, like we talked about like Anthony Green, right? Like
Mhm.
someone like him talking about it is very important for that 16 to 18-year-old kid in the crowd that is feeling the same way that he is, and
Mhm.
says, well, man, if my favorite singer talks about it, then why wouldn't I want to do it? Right?
Yeah.
Anthony's a bit more accessible than the guy who just won two Emmys and a Grammy, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't feel as connected as you do to that. So it's like I would encourage, you know, men to talk about their feelings, talk about their emotions with people that they feel safe with, and the people on the other side of it to give them a landing pad, right? Give them a soft landing to where they feel safe to do so, and they don't feel judged, or they don't feel like they're being kind of, they're being like put under a microscope, where it's like, yeah, I get it. It sucks. Things suck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about all the times when you do see bands cancel. And for the most part, some people, I've seen a lot more. I think we saw it with Oh, who did it recently? I think it was a while ago. Maybe Jason Alon of Let Live. I think he'd said something once. He had canceled a Fever 333.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of comments. I was happy to see there was a little bit of a shift where there were more comments of take care of you. Great,
Yeah.
great. Take right. Versus, I think even a couple years ago, I mean, yeah, of course there were some of those comments that were like, oh, mental health or whatever it was. But I think years ago there wasn't as many of those, oh, take care of you. It was like, well, why are you doing this? Just suck it up. And I think I love to see when an artist prioritizes their mental health because again, it brings it back to
Yeah.
me where, whoa, I need to be doing that. Yes, I'm not an artist, I'm not a musician, but in my daily life, like maybe I had a get together or whatever it was. And if I'm not in the right headspace, it's okay to take a
Hmm.
break. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm put me first. I'm not doing that. And again, obviously be kind about it. Don't just, but like I think it's helped me realize hey, like even doing this, if there's a day where I'm like, I am going through it, I don't know if I could talk music and mental health today, giving myself that, you know what, I can put a pause on that and I can put what I need first. And I do. I think a lot of people too, when we see musicians and they have a substance abuse problem, usually it does stem from a mental health. There's a deeper issue there than
Right.
that. And I think that I like to see a change in that too. There's a little bit of change in that conversation with substance abuse and us talking about it. And not so much of people being like, oh, well, you know, they're just a drug addict. Like
Yeah.
our language is changing a little bit, and I love to see that. And I love to see, especially the male artists out there. And it's just like you said, where I had so many people, if they listened to our episode and they were following us, they're like, someone like Anthony Green has helped me so much in my own mental health or my own. There was a comment I got, I think, on YouTube where a guy said, he's been sober for a while because of hearing someone like Anthony Green be open and him taking that. So I think it's almost like a domino effect where it's not easy to share your mental health as a musician or as a man, but there is definitely, I've seen and heard just the positivity of being a little open if you can, because hearing that fan say that, I was almost like, oh, I don't even know what to say to this because this is
Yeah.
amazing that you're taking those steps. So yeah, I appreciate everything you're saying because I think like what reel can I put? What chunk of this can I put and get people to listen because I think that it's so important that we can talk about our mental health. And I wasn't always open about it. But it was like me going through a really hard time that was like, all right, if I can help one person maybe feel a little less alone or see themselves in a guest or what we're saying, then that's worth it to be open. There's something there. And it's that connection, right? Like whether it's
Yeah.
you in a band or in therapy and what you do, you still have that human connection, but in a very different way.
Yeah. And that's like the main reason I became a therapist was the human connection part of it was what if I'm not in a band anymore, what way can I connect? And
Hmm.
that was the way that I kind of wanted to connect was through being a therapist. So yeah, I think that's kind of like where we need to kind of go, right? Like
Yeah.
is more connection and more outreach. I think there needs to be like less steps. It's really hard for like everyone's got a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a lot of things going on, right? And like that's why I don't like, that I mean, don't like. That's why I have like mixed feelings about certain companies that are working within the music industry where it's like, sure, you're giving them these steps and these resources, but they don't have the time to do all that. They don't have the thought process to do all that, right? Like how do we decrease that, right? Like I always had this dream that like you could turn like meet and greets into like group therapy sessions
Hmm.
where like instead of like the typical meet and greet, you can sit with the band and talk about issues, whether it be like regarding the scene, right? Because like we've seen plenty of issues in the scene
Yeah.
in the past few years, whether it be some inappropriate behaviors or substance or mental health or mistreatment. And wouldn't it be great if we all work together, right? So I think, hopefully we're headed in a better direction the more and more we allow ourselves to kind of talk about it and connect.
Yeah, and just even, and I hate to bring it back to him, but I went to a solo Anthony Green show and he had a question answer in the middle of his acoustic set. And one of the things, what you just said, like sparked that, where it was such a meaningful show because in the middle of it, people would ask questions and they were asking questions about his mental health. What does he do? And we,
Hmm.
in the middle of these songs, and maybe a crowd of like, it was at Crossroads in Garwood. So it was
Okay, yeah, yeah.
really
Small
small
venue, yeah.
venue. And it was such an intimate thing because people were sharing their experiences and then he would share his and there was talks of like meditation, there was talks of
Hmm.
like all this stuff and I was like, wow, how special is this? And I'm glad I'm seeing this, but how great would this be for so many? Like you were saying, we're in the meet and greet. Maybe we did stuff like that where I just felt that connection in that room of people that were sharing things that maybe they wouldn't or maybe they wouldn't have, but they felt comfortable to be like,
Hmm.
yeah, I went through this, or your music saved me. I'm how many years sober now because of this, or what do you do for self-care, things like that. And it was like these are such important conversations, and what a place to do that. And
Yeah,
I do wish we had that more in the music world. And Warped Tour's coming back, and I know they help the nonprofits and they do that. I would love even there on a bigger stage of we have that where they talk mental health and maybe they did and I knew that like to write Love on Our Arms had a tent always. And yeah, you would have the conversation, but it was if you went to their tent. So I
right.
think
Yeah,
and some people may not seek that out or they may just walk by it. So I think that would be really great in the music world if whatever bands felt comfortable or musicians comfortable to do it because I saw right then and there how impactful it was. Like I went home and I
yeah,
was like, wow, like there were people like me that struggle with mental health too, and they're listening to our favorite musician, and we're all having this big conversation. It was more so like I didn't even want him to play because the conversation was just so good.
right.
And it's wow, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a side that you don't get to see often. And I think to add on to what you're saying about like Warped Tour or these other big places, I think, you know, from a promoter's standpoint, they don't see it as something that's worth it
Hmm.
because it's not what they're trying to do, right? Like they're trying to make money. They're trying to do this, they're trying to do that. And even if they allow for a nonprofit or someone to put up a tent, like you said, you have to access that tent. You have to find that tent among 50 million other tents.
Yeah.
And I think there again there needs to be a lot more connection and talking about it with people who are change makers who can make a difference because the person sitting at home can't go to a Kevin Lyman or the Furnace Fest is a big one right now. Like
Yeah.
you can't go to those people and be like, "Hey, I want to do this, and this, and help this way." It's like, how do you, how do you connect and do this stuff, right? Like, how do you have all of these bands and their crew, right? Like, let's not even forget about the crew,
Hmm.
right? Like, how do you have all of these bands and crew come into town and like, let's give them the opportunity to work on their mental health at these places, right? Give them the opportunity to say, you know what, like we're gonna get a team together and we're gonna have that available for the bands and their crew to kind of talk with. So I think there's room there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of room for a lot of different things to happen. And hopefully as we get deeper and deeper into the conversation that they do happen because I think it's something that's definitely needed and definitely being talked about amongst band members and crew members and fans. It's just a matter of like actually putting pen to paper and actually hitting the ground running and helping them.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, like even I'm guilty of that, forgetting about the crew. Like, yes, we talk about the musicians and the bands, but the crew that is doing those same tours and those same elements going through that. And I think um, maybe even someone listening to that and hearing that, because I think a lot of us don't think about that. Like I was guilty of that. It was just like, oh, okay, well, you're just, the merch guy. But no, you're not just the merch guy. You're part of that. You're going through that. And
Right.
I think about the biggest thing for me to realize mental health and labels and the industry was when Bayside had that tragic
Yeah.
accident. And I always remember, and thinking back to that and hearing them talk about it, I'm like, wow, I hope that they had, because back then mental health was, like we said, it wasn't talked about. I hope a band like that and the dangers of touring right there, I don't, I hope someone was around them and I hope they had that handled, but I can't say that they were, right? They were on a small label and on, I think it was Victory at the time, and never to bad talk them. But I just think the timing of that, and I think back to that, like, I do hope that there was something in the industry there for everybody in that situation.
Yeah, I don't know that there was, like, like
Right.
I only know what everyone else knows, right? Like
Right.
that was a
Yeah.
horrible tragedy, especially Beats,
Yeah.
he was such a integral part of that scene, and especially like the Long Island and Queens scene. And I don't know if there was something back then. I think it took a lot of grit from bands like Bayside, and I think like the Sleeping were very affected by that.
Hmm.
The band Enwell, who was on tour with them at the time too, who was significantly hurt in that as well. I don't think there was that much there for them, and I don't think, like you said, not to badmouth, but like I don't think Victory was doing deep mental health work at
Hmm.
the time. I know, like, that just wasn't a thing, right? Like it wasn't something that anyone talked about. You just dealt with it. It just was what it was. So, hopefully now there people know there are outlets, and hopefully those guys
Yeah.
have been able to kind of begin to deal with those things and heal later on in life. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be done.
Yeah. And it's wild to even think about. Like when I started going to shows, what it was 2003, 2004, first Warped Tour, in high school. And
Yeah.
then now it's like I think about the industry and just time, like we're in 2025 and we're still having these conversations, and there's still, we have made, I mean, even for me to have this kind of podcast and for it to be
Right,
like
yeah.
successful is like, wow, I never would have thought like music and mental health. Um, but I think we still have, like you said, there's just such a way to go. And I just, how we get there, like, I don't know that. I just hope, like you said, conversations, connection. And I think the more, in my experience, maybe someone feels less alone, the better. And then maybe a
Yeah.
domino effect of, hey, and I guess, oh my gosh, this has been so great talking to you and having you on and all these great things. But I guess if there is someone to kind of end our conversation, if there is someone out there that is really struggling to find something to cope. I know we talked about journaling. I know mindfulness was a big one. One of my guests said, I had no idea that even existed. So for me, that was
Yeah.
huge. Is there anything you can kind of, I mean, again, there's not a one size fits all and everybody is different, but maybe little things maybe they can implement in their daily life to kind of help a little bit?
Yeah, I think I love journaling. I think journaling is like a really great one. I think meditation, when done correctly, is awesome. I'm a big visual person, so I like, in the past I've utilized like virtual reality. I
Hmm.
find that to be like really awesome. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm big like being outside, taking walks, getting yourself active. I love taking, a walk when I'm feeling a certain type of way, or taking a drive, and kind of just like looking at something like beautiful,
Hmm.
is really helpful. I always say, like, self-care is one of those things where, like, if it feels good, then you're doing the right thing. Yeah, I think I'm all about like getting outside in nature, putting your feet on the ground.
Hmm.
I love water, so being by the water is a thing as well. but yeah, those are definitely some things. I'm trying to think some other stuff that's I'm drawing like a blank right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, like like I think for the biggest for me is getting outside of where it is, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're stuck in the house and you're feeling a certain type of way, get out of the house,
Hmm.
right? Like put your feet on the ground and go out there and smell and see and hear and taste and touch, right? Like those are all of the things that are gonna help you. Um, so yeah, I would challenge anyone if they're feeling a certain way to like get outside and do and put your feet on the ground.
Yeah, I think, and I used to not almost believe that when people would just say, "Oh, go outside." I used to think, "Okay," but it's so true of getting. Anytime I've been really in it mentally, if it's in the house by me, like you said, getting outside, getting my feet on the ground. One of the funniest things I've done to help my mental health is squirrels. I have a lot of squirrels here,
Hmm.
and I got one of those squirrel benches. And when I was really going through it to motivate me to even get outside, I bought one of the little benches. I put like little peanuts on it, and sure enough, these squirrels came. And now every day they come out and they're ready for me
Right.
to feed them. And it was almost that motivation to get outside. Because I know a lot of people might be like, oh, I can't get off the couch or I can't do that. But finding that, it's like that's my motivation whenever I'm like, I'm going to get outside because I'm going to feed these squirrels. Now I'm going to stay outside because where I'm at in the house is not in a good spot. And it's been the best thing for my mental health is these squirrels that come running up
Yeah.
every time I open the door. And it sounds so cheesy or like silly to somebody, but that has helped so much. And I definitely recommend anybody to listen to, especially that part, because I think that's very difficult. Maybe people don't think that to maybe get away from where it is that you're feeling that and remove yourself a little bit. I know I'm another one. I love to color. Coloring's been my
Hmm.
go-to. Doing anything creative, even me editing this podcast or something like doing something creative has really helped aid that as well. So, oh, well, thank you so much. This has been so great. I feel like there's so much to unpack in this one. And I appreciate you being so honest and wanting to take time. And this has been really, really great to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on to kind of further the thought of mental health,
Mhm.
especially in the music scene where I think it there's so much to be done, but so much to be done in general for mental health. And I think as we, enter year after year there's always something to kind of deal with, so it's
Yeah.
it's it's always going to be there, it's always going to be needed, and I encourage anyone listening and checking out, if you have any questions, I'm online, feel free to ask away. If I can help you, I could probably find someone who can, so
Oh, that's perfect. I was gonna say I'm gonna link you and everything to for that, and I love that. Like if you can't, maybe you could help find somebody
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I think that it's almost like that whole community aspect, and it kind of does bring it back to the music world and that community
Yeah,
aspect and that and I think that's so important. But yeah, oh, but again, oh, thank you so much. This has been
yeah,
I still can't believe
absolutely.
I'm like I used to listen to your music all the time, and now I'm like sitting here talking music and mental health and. It's so cool to see that you went from that in the music world and now and that connection in maybe people were helped with your music to now helping them in a much I don't want to say bigger way because some people might say music is so big, a different way. And I think
Yeah.
that's really, really cool to see that. And all right, guys, that was my conversation with Daniel Rinaldi. Again, I can't thank him enough for wanting to come on my show because I think he was just really honest about everything mental health wise. And he can look at it from a much different perspective than, say, someone like myself who's not a professional or just your everyday person because he is a therapist. He is a mental health professional. To get to hear from him and what he thinks about, and to be able to have a conversation with someone like him who's in the mental health field. It was just such an opportunity to kind of really get a feel where things are at in mental health, where they should go, and the struggles of everyday people and mental health. And again, it was just such a full circle moment because I listened to him in Bed Light for Blue Eyes and then to get to sit down, it's always cool when that happens. So I really appreciate that. So go check all the links below. He's been doing a couple lyric breakdowns recently that I think are really, really cool. cool. So please go give him a follow and support that and go check those out because I think it's really awesome to, again, to get his perspective on things like that and kind of merge his emo days and being an emo, being emo, but also being a therapist. And I think he's one of us. So I think that's really cool. So go check him out. As for our show, if you are liking this thing even just a little bit, positive rating or a review goes a long way, as well as a follow. That would mean the world. I want to thank everybody who has been helping me out. As you know, I've been doing this by myself since October, and I appreciate you guys because it has not been easy, and I cannot thank you enough for tuning in every week and helping support an independent podcast. Justine should be back sometime in May. I don't know what's going on there, but we're going to get that going. But new episodes every Tuesday, and we will see you guys next time. All right, bye guys.